You're in the right place for some great football history. Today, we're going to talk with Timothy P. Brown of footballarchaeology.com about America's oldest football field and what's going on with it and when it started. Tim's coming up in just a moment to tell us all about it.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of pigskindispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history, and welcome to another Tuesday, footballarchaeology.com day, where we get to visit with Timothy P. Brown and learn another great antiquity of football. Tim, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Hey, thanks, Darren. Look forward to chatting about old times and old fields.
Old times and old fields, a great way to take us into a story that you wrote not too long ago, earlier this year, titled America's Oldest Football Field in one of your tidbits on footballarchaeology.com. What do you have to say about the story?
Well, I guess if any, if there's listeners out there who had not read the tidbit, if you were to guess which football field has been in use as a football field for the longest, I would guess maybe 1 in 1,000 would guess the correct answer. Probably a lot more could guess the right region of the country. So it was an Eastern team, which would make sense, right? But probably not too many would guess the school. And yet that school was, so the school is Wesleyan, and they play now in, it's a big deal, academically, big deal conference of a bunch of small schools on the East Coast, New England schools. And, but they play D3 football or D3, all their sports. But there was a day when Wesleyan and some of their counterparts would, match up and with the biggest teams playing at the time. So, here and there, we'll talk about the Intercollegiate Football Association, which was founded in 1876. At that time, it was, Penn, Harvard, and Princeton, and Yale attended but didn't join. And then within a year or two, Wesleyan joined. So Wesleyan was part of that early mix of teams that was in the IFA. And I don't think they ever really competed very well. They lost consistently to those teams. But then, and they would play they'd play Dartmouth all the time and other schools like Williams and, similar schools to them. But the point really is that in the 1880s and into the 1890s, they were playing with the best teams in the country. And so, like a lot of places early on, they played where, like, in the best open field they could find, and they happened to have one on campus. And apparently it had some ruts, and the fields back then just weren't like they are today. They weren't these manicured lawns, but they used the same field for baseball. I've seen images of them setting up like temporary, we think of tennis courts as these permanent these permanent things back then or now. But back then you set up a tennis court wherever there was an open piece of flat land, where there was grass. And so, I've seen pictures of tennis courts set up on this field.
I think I've seen some images from our friends north of the border where they would flood some of their fields and have hockey rinks on the football field in the wintertime.
Yeah. I mean, we had one at the park one street up from us, growing up. I'm not that far north. I was pretty far north.
Yeah, it's pretty far north where you are.
But then so they would play games on this field. And then in 1897, one of their alums, a guy from the class of 1862, so he graduates in the middle of the Civil War, he donated money to fix up this field and kind of build a stadium, make a stadium out of it. And so that field opened in 1897, and Wesleyan has been playing football on that field ever since. Right now, it's gone through different, variations of, stands and scoreboards and whatnot. But, fundamentally, it's the same location that they've played their games at. Just, another couple of things that kind of interesting that came up in the research, some of which I already knew, but just reminded. So one was that in the late 1880s, in 1888 and 1889, Wesleyan had a faculty member who was on the athletic committee, and he had been the manager of the Princeton football team in his undergrad days. So he helped coach the Wesleyan team in those years. And that guy's name was Woodrow Wilson, who would later become the president of Princeton and then the president of the United States. So they were, if you played for Wesleyan back then, you could later claim that you played football for the president of the United States, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely.
And then the other thing was just and this was actually the 1887 yearbook. It's just kind of a cute thing I found. They described the positions, and the positions pretty much match up the way that we would describe offensive positions now, though they had two halfbacks and a fullback. But the guys between the ends and the guards, they called the left and right tackler, not tackle. So, and but the cool thing is that that's in print, but that's how the tackle position got its name, because it was on defense, teams used to run the ball at the tackles. They'd, just running off tackle or right at the tackle. And so these guys made a lot of tackles. And so they were the left and right tackler. So it was just neat to see that in print as the original form of the term.
Yeah. Yeah, that is pretty cool. Very interesting, especially at the oldest continuous football field.
Yeah.
Now, I got a question. Maybe you can answer. Now, we know it was a grass field back then. A lot of these stadiums have gone from natural turf to artificial turf. And some is this field still a grass stadium or?
I don't know. The image or the tidbit has an image of the stadium. A recent year image of the stadium. So it would show whether it's natural turf or grass, but I don't know offhand.
Yeah, looks pretty green. That's why that's what posed the question to me. I'm like,
Okay.
boy, if they had it that green, maybe either they got some great photographers with some nice filters or really good grounds crew.
Yeah. I mean, I would guess it's probably artificial turf. I mean, it's probably like any other field that's used nowadays where they've got, they're playing lacrosse, they're playing field hockey on that thing, they're playing soccer. So I would guess it's probably, artificial, but
There's still some really nice football fields out there that are natural turf, and
yeah.
they do a nice job of manicuring them and make them look pretty on TV anyway. So,
Well, like in the Big Ten, it's mostly the schools that have like big, it's not really agriculture, but like grass science kinds of programs,
like the horticulture
Yeah.
type.
I mean, like Michigan State has, and I believe Purdue might. I'm not sure, but Michigan State's got a big program in that stuff, and so, they're not getting rid of their
Right.
grass field. And then, I think generally in the South there's more grass than there is up north. But nowadays, I mean, even the grass fields are beautifully drained, and
Mhm.
the drainage was just coming into play on athletic fields, turn of the century or that kind of time frame. So, and those were only in like the best spots.
Yeah, I can tell you for one that spent a lot of time standing and running on a football field, I'd much rather be on grass, even on the sloppy days, because it's something about turf fields. And I went from, the AstroTurf carpets to the field turfs of today. And there's something about it. Your shins and your knees and your ankles just don't,
Yeah.
they feel really achy by the time you're done with the game on there compared to a nice giving, earthen
Yeah.
fields.
Well, and especially the original old AstroTurf, um, those
Oh
things were
yeah,
hotter than blazes. I mean,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, your feet just burned on those things.
yeah. And it's just you felt the cement underneath you on
Yeah.
those. So yeah, definitely. Well, a great story and great a monument to the game of football. Having this field that's been, what 150 years, or I'm sorry, you started the 1890s. They started on that field,
1897. So
so
it's,
130 years, give or take
yeah,
a few
yeah.
years. So just amazing that doing that on the same place and playing the same game.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's an interesting thing that, I mean, I've talked about this elsewhere, but like for the most part, if the with the pro teams, if they're getting rid of one stadium, they build a new one in a different location. Colleges, some of that goes on, but the vast majority of it, they redo the existing stadium, or they'll tear it, even like Northwestern, they're tearing the whole thing down and then they're rebuilding on the same site, right? I mean, campuses for the most part are space constrained, and they want to stay on campus, whatever. But like, even places like Georgia Tech has a really old stadium. Wisconsin's got a really old stadium. There's others that are, and then a whole slew of them built in the 20s. Pretty much everybody's still playing in those stadiums. So it's, I don't know, so these guys are maybe they're the ones that established that template.
yeah, maybe the aren't as architecturally appeasing and don't have the technology that some of these brand new stadiums offer, but there's some nostalgia, almost like going to the old baseball stadium, going to Fenway
Yeah,
and watching a game compared to, going to some of the newer stadiums. There's just something about it,
yeah.
the architecture and the feel of the game. It
And
just,
the neighborhood. I mean, even like,
yeah.
I don't know, all those old places are really cool. Now, yeah, I think some of the new places are really cool too, but for different reasons.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Two different pieces of enthusiasm that come out from the fans from those. So the nostalgic feel always wins in my heart. So
Yeah, yeah,
your butt might be a little bit sore, but and you're cricking your neck a little bit and looking around poles and things like we talked about in the past. But you definitely get to feel the history in some of those stadiums. It's kind of cool. And so speaking of feeling the history, you talk about the history of the game quite often, going into some of these nooks and crannies that not a lot of people get an advantage point of seeing, but you have these a few times a week coming out, and maybe you could share with the listeners how they can partake in some of your writings on these.
yeah. Well, so obviously they can subscribe to this podcast and listen here, but if you want to read the tidbits, I release them every couple of days more or less, and so you just go to my I've got a Substack called footballarchaeology.com. You just type that in and subscribe, and you'll get an email every time that I send out a new story. You can also follow me on Twitter, on Threads, or on the Substack app, or obviously just go out there and bookmark it and go whenever you want. But if you want to make sure you get every story, whether you read it or not, at least you'll know that it came across. Then subscribing is really the only way to do that.
All right. Well, Tim, we definitely appreciate you joining us here on this Tuesday and every Tuesday as we get to talk to you. We're honored by that, and we would love to talk to you again next Tuesday.
Very good. Look forward to it, and we'll find something to talk about.
That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.